You already know if you've been, connecting on this soul care with Stevie Boy thing for very long, that I have a tendency to look at every tree in the forest. And sometimes I have to step back in order to view the forest. Today, without apology, I'm going to look at another tree. We're in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 12. That is why I am suffering as I am, yet this is no cause for shame, because I know whom I have believed. Last time we talked about to know. To not just know about him, but to know him. There's a grand canyon of difference between knowing about and truly knowing anybody. And this is especially true, I think, in terms of my relationship with Jesus. I, like Paul, want to know him. There's a if that was all that Paul had written, this was back in Philippians 3:16. I want to know him. Wow, what a cry of passion. If that was all there was, that would be awesome. But he goes on in that verse to say, I want to know him and to share in the fellowship of his suffering. Ooh, okay, there's an aspect of knowing Christ that we've already gone on a big long diatribe about suffering and how the church in America just kind of wants to not have that part of the whole picture. But if I'm going to know Jesus, I can be willing to share in the fellowship of his suffering. Okay. I know whom I have believed. Now there's a thing about this whom I have believed that is worth a look. To believe, that's not hard to understand. It means I trust. If I believe, I trust. A layer probably deeper than that is if I believe, then I have faith in. What I don't believe, I don't trust, and I don't have faith in. And there's a whole big catalog of things that I would put in that category. But there is those who I believe. And those people, those ideas, those principles, I trust. If I believe, I trust. If I trust, I have faith. This is a very hard thing to quantify. So I don't know how I would ever be able to somehow break it down so that I could say, well, Paul believed this much and I only believe this much. Or those people in that denomination, they believe this much and I believe that much. That you can't do that. And it's not about that anyway. Paul's not saying, I believe more than you do. He's just saying, hey, I have this solid belief. And he goes on, and am convinced. This is a convinced belief. Remember, I talk about it quite often, but Hebrews 11:1, the Bible's definition of faith. Now, faith is what? The assurance of things not seen, the evidence of things hoped for. Our faith is not ethereal. It's not fuzzy and I'm running out of adjectives. It's not just this thing. There's evidence for our hope. There is assurance for our faith. And Paul says, hey, I know whom I have believed and am convinced. I think the King James Version says, and am persuaded. How did Paul get convinced that he could put his faith, believe in, and I'll just tell you, the one is, I believe, is Jesus, this one whom Paul says, I have believed. How did he get there? Well, this is one of the ugliest things about faith. I just think there is a reasonableness about the idea that you want more faith. I don't believe anybody is able to say, well, yeah, I've got all the faith I need. Don't need any more. On one end of that idea, there is this. You don't need big faith. I mean, Jesus said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to the mountain, go jump in the sea, and it will. So it's not quantity of faith. There is not a measurable thing here, okay? But faith that is convinced, a convinced faith, a persuaded faith. How did he get persuaded? How did he get convinced? Did he just blindly say, well, okay, what? Yeah, okay. Well, I suppose there were times when he had to do what felt like just blindly put his faith in this one. But it's a convinced faith. And one of the ways that our faith gets convinced is by our experience of God's faithfulness. Now, I don't want to make you guilty of my sin, but I am horrible about remembering, reflecting on, registering when God is faithful. I'm like I should have a PhD in fretting about the future because I do it so often and so well, but I'm not very good about reflecting on the past and noticing when God showed up. And I'm horrible. I think most people are this way. We don't very often notice God's faithfulness as it happens in real time. Often, we have to see it in reflection. I do have this as a belief that the more, and it's a skill, the more skilled I am in seeing, noticing God's faithfulness in reflection, that sets me up to be able to notice it in real time as it happens. Paul was convinced that it was legitimate to believe in Jesus because of his experience. Now, let's be realistic. That was apostolic experience. That was the experience of being knocked off his horse by a bolt of light, blinded on the road to Damascus, literally hearing the voice of Jesus. His traveling companions thought it had thundered. They heard, but they couldn't distinguish the words. Paul, then Saul, did. I've not had that kind of experience. There were times when Paul, was trying to enter a region and the Holy Spirit said, no, not yet. That's not where I want you to go. There are other times he said, go there because I have many people there. Okay. And I'm not saying God doesn't do it that way anymore. I'm just saying I haven't experienced that. But I have experienced times in my life that the only explanation is God intervened. This is paramount in anybody who wants to follow Jesus. In our lives, it is paramount that we notice these things How else could we be convinced? Now, some people who, this is my category of people, I grew up in a home where it was all God talk. Pretty much everything connected back to God. Everything was about, I don't have a time when I could say, oh, that's when I learned about Jesus. I don't remember ever not knowing about Jesus. And so sometimes my faith, this is my early years, my faith was the result of believing my mom and dad, believing the culture I was in. But there came a time in my high school years when I had to believe in this one in whom Paul had believed, right? Every Christian, every follower of Christ who is seeking maturity and deeper devotion to Him has to develop the skill, the habit, the pattern of reflecting on God's faithfulness. Because that, it's not like when I believed in my parents and what they believed. That's not bad, that's not wrong, but that's immature. Maturity is when I believe because of my own experience, and it goes beyond mere experience, study. I have to pay attention. I have to read. I literally have to devour Scripture so that it continues to convince me and it aligns with my experience of God's intervention. I got a pretty long catalog of that, and I want to challenge you to maybe literally build your own catalog of when God showed up. Because if you want a convinced belief, you're going to have to be able to point to those times in specific, not in general. I don't think there are very many Christians who do that. And a lot of times I don't think that's because, well, they just aren't serious enough about Jesus, or they're just not mature yet. I mean, I don't remember ever hearing in a sermon, I don't remember sitting in a class and hearing any teacher say, hey, build a catalog of when God showed up. It's a skill to develop, to learn, to practice. So here's the challenge. Build a catalog in reflection of when God showed up in your life. Now, if you want to take it a layer deeper, okay, when He showed up, that catalog is all about my intellect, right? What I know. You want to go a step deeper, recall what you felt before, during, and after that intervention. His interventions that provoke feelings and emotions. It's not just about, well, I can identify that objectively and dispassionately. Well, I know you can, but and it's good. But I mean, you can't live in denial of the fact that what we feel about it is really, really important. Make a catalog. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.